recorded if you don't like to be seen. And I would actually like to share this talk on my Numbat blog. So if you don't like to be seen, maybe switch your cameras off. I'll start sharing my screen now. I hope I get the right one. Can you all see it? Or Kate, can you tell me, can you see my shared screen?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, good, Anka.
Okay, just stop me if anything goes wrong. I'll start here. I'll start with the objectives for the PhD project. The project regarded the Numbat population in the Upper Warren region, and we had to take an adaptive approach. As Kate said just now, we weren't really aware or didn't really know how to best detect Numbats. So the first stage, we developed robust survey methods to confirm presence and absence of the Numbats in areas, to develop some measure of abundance or occupancy, which then allows us to monitor population trends over space and time. Then we were wanting to look at habitat preferences with the developed survey methods, especially at forest management, prescribed burns, timber harvesting, and introduce predator control. The outline for this talk, I will start with an introduction of the Numbat, the study area, and traditional survey methods. And then I will talk about the work I've done. There are 4 chapters where we have 2 chapters with camera trials. That's chapter 1 and 3. And chapter 2 is about detection methods, comparison. And then at chapter 4, we were looking at the habitat use. And I will finish with conclusions and suggestions for future research. The Numbat is a small to medium marsupial, about 500 to 700 grams in weight, with the female slightly smaller than the male. Numbats do have a pelage pattern, which is individually characteristic, especially the white stripes, which differ in between individuals. And you can see also on the back here, the stripes are breaking, and that helps us to identify Numbat individuals. Numbats are diurnal. They feed on termites, and when they dig out termites, they leave feeding signs behind. Here you've got a picture near a rotten piece of wood, and another one where you can see small digs where a Numbat has dug out termites from just below the surface. Numbats leave behind scats also. You can see here are some lighter ones, and at the bottom darker ones. These scats always contain exoskeleton parts of termites, so it's quite easy to know once you find a Numbat scat that you have the right one. Numbats use hollow logs and burrows. Burrows, they dig themselves. This is an entrance of a burrow just under a fallen tree log. The burrows are dug down a tunnel into a nesting chamber. And Numbats also use hollow logs. This particular one here, we've seen a Numbat disappearing into the hole when we approached. So these logs and burrows give Numbats the opportunity for hiding away from predators and for resting and nesting during the day and night. Numbats mate in January, and after 2 weeks about, the female gives birth to normally 4 young, which attach to the female's teats. Here she carries 4 young. The female carries the young for about 6 months before she leaves them behind in a burrow normally, and there they stay until they start exploring the surroundings in September and disperse in November, December to find their own territory. Territory size or home range size differs between Numbat individuals from radio tracking. It was found out that some individuals use territories less than a hectare and others more than 100 hectares. So there is a lot of variation, and it's estimated to be about 50 hectares per animal. And same-sex territories are believed not to overlap. The distribution, historically, Numbats occurred over most of the southern half of the Australian continent, the blue area here. And in the 80s left, there was only 2 populations, the green dots here. This is the Dryandra woodland and the Upper Warren region, the study area. Since '85, there are reintroduction sites marked here. The red dots are the ones which were not successful, and the black dots are the sites which were successful, also over in the eastern states. And since recently, there is the reintroduction sites also in the Northern Territory. Currently, the estimate from 2018 from the conservation advice, the estimate was that there is 880 to 1,280 numbats in total. The numbat is classed as endangered on the IUCN Red List, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and the Western Australian Biodiversity Conservation Act. Threats to the species include habitat loss, introduced predators, likely appropriate fire regimes, disease, drought, and climate change. So I mentioned that the Upper Warren region down here, about 300 kilometers from Perth, was my study area. Here is a map of it. There is 140,000 hectares of forested land, which consists of the Kingston National Park, the Parrop Nature Reserve, and also areas of state forest. And my study area stayed above the Muir Highway. The survey methods which were traditionally used for numbats are driven transects, where a car is being driven slowly through the bush, and observers from within the car try to spot numbats left, right, and in front. This is traditionally used in areas where the undergrowth is not as dense as in the Upper Warren region. So we weren't quite sure if this method is applicable in the Upper Warren region. The same for sign searches. In the Dryandra and other and some reintroduction sites, sign searches are commonly used looking for digs and scats. And in the Upper Warren, we weren't sure if we can use it because there is other marsupial which are digging the soil surface. Therefore, camera trapping was a hope of ours that it works out. And in the Upper Warren, there was already a pilot study with camera traps, which showed that numbats were detected with cameras. So the first chapter, we were concentrating on optimizing camera traps. We did 3 trials at Perth Zoo to make sure we get enough detection of numbats there, because they are so difficult to detect in the wild. We tested different camera trap heights to determine optimal height. We looked at elevated downward angle cameras to see if we can get pictures of the numbat back to identify individuals. And also we were looking at different camera models to increase detections. The first trial for camera trap height, we used the Reconyx PC900 camera, which is a well-regarded camera type and is widely used in Australia for wildlife detection. We used the setup, which you can see on the picture, in 3 enclosures for 4 days, where we had the motion detectors at 10, 25, 40, and 55 centimeters. And at the bottom to the right is a time-lapse camera, which helped us to determine how many missed detections we had from the cameras. The key results, we had 1,869 numbat detections, and the best detection rates came from the lower cameras, 10 and 25 centimeters. But with help of the time-lapse camera, we realized that the camera in the best position still was missing 40%, which caused us some worries. The second trial, the methods, we used the elevated downward angled cameras for numbat individual identification. We used Reconyx cameras set to time-lapse mode, because if you use the passive infrared sensor, they don't operate very well when you angle them downwards. The field of view is restricted. So we used time-lapse mode in this test in 3 enclosures over 8 days, and cameras were set up between 1 and 2 meters at 5 different heights. And the key results from here, we had 2,100 individual identifications. And on the graph, you can see that there is a trend that more identifications were possible from higher cameras and cameras in higher positions. On the pictures down there, you can see the patterns that you quite easily can identify different individuals from the stripe patterns. The model comparison, we used Reconix PC900 cameras, again, which have a 40-degree detection and lens angle. We compared those with Swift 3C cameras, standard and wide angle models with 52 and 110 degree of detection angle. Those cameras were installed at about 25 centimeters height with the motion detector. And again, at the bottom, we used the time-lapse camera to help determine missed detections. This setup was used in 3 enclosures over 6 days. We had 3,703 Numbat detections here, and you can see that the Swift wide-angle camera had most of the detections, even more than the time-lapse camera because of the wider detection angle. And this camera only missed 11% of known Numbat detections. So the conclusions are that the Swift 3.3 wide-angle camera at 25 centimeters was best to detect Numbats, and that elevated downward-angled cameras are suitable for Numbat individual identification. However, with those cameras, more research is needed to overcome battery and SD card limitations when you set it to time-lapse, and that could maybe be overcome with external motion detectors. I have to note here that our final test where we compared the camera models, this happened while we were already conducting field work for the next chapter. So we still use the Reconix camera for the comparison of methods in the field. So chapter 2 is about methods comparison. We were looking at driven transects, sign surveys, and camera trapping to see which one is most effective. And we were also doing a cost analysis of those methods. The driven transects were conducted along 3 transects, which were about 50 kilometers long. We were driving in the car at 15 kilometers an hour speed on warm days, and 4 observers in the car tried to spot Numbats. These surveys we repeated 7 times. Sign surveys were conducted along the same transects at 50 sites. We were looking for digs and scats on those sites, used 4 observers, that was me and 3 volunteers usually, and we did 7 repeat sign surveys to allow occupancy modeling. Camera trapping was conducted at the same sites. As I said, we used the Reconix PC900 cameras at 50 sites and left the cameras operating over 4 months in total. Key results from this study is sign surveys cost us about $18,600. We conducted 350 sign searches, had 88 detections, and a single detection cost us approximately $211. Camera trapping was slightly more expensive. We had 160,000 images, which gave us 26 detections, so the cost per detection was $736, and driven transects overall were the least expensive. We drove 1,200 kilometers, had only 7 detections, so the per detection cost was very high, and we only had 0.58 Numbats per 100 kilometers. So clearly to be seen on the graph here that sign surveys were most effective to detect Numbats in the Upper Warren. Looking at the same data in a different way, site accumulation. With sign surveys, we found Numbat signs at 39 sites, and with camera trapping at 13 sites, driven transects only at 5 sites. The higher detection rates of the sign surveys also gave us better detection probabilities down at the right here. We had a 21 to 35 chance to find Numbat signs where they were present, and the camera traps only had a 2 to 6% chance to find to detect Numbats where they were present. So it was quite clear that sign surveys were most successful and cost-effective than camera trapping and driven transects. Therefore, at this point, we recommend sign surveys until better survey methods can be found for the Numbat monitoring in the Upper Warren region in conjunction with occupancy modeling. To try to increase Numbat detections by cameras, we did another camera trap optimization trial. To increase performance, we try to periodically reposition cameras within sites, and also by using the camera with the wider detection angles. We conducted this survey at 17 sites over 9 weeks and considered all animals. Cameras were set up in stationary positions. This was where we used the Reconyx camera attached to trees. And then we had a setup of Reconyx and Swift cameras on metal stakes, which is well camouflaged here. And yeah, again, the Swift camera is the wide angle camera. And we set up these cameras 25 centimeters above ground. And we aimed cameras during setup at a wildcard, which you can see at the bottom here, to precisely set the cameras out in the same direction. And also these test images helped us later on to determine if detections were within or outside the Reconyx field of view, and also if animals were closer or further away than 5 meters of the camera. Results from here, we detected 16 mammal, 1 reptile, and 17 bird taxa. And you can see that the stationary Reconyx and repositioned Reconyx had about the same amount of detections, whereas the repositioned Swift camera had more than double the amount of detections. Table with a lot of information, so I help you to break that down. Here you see the detections per 1,000 trap days from the different camera treatments. On the left here, we have animal in 3 different weight classes, 1 kilos, 1 to 10 kilos, and more than 10 kilos. So if we look first at the animals of less than 1 kilo, you can see that the Swift camera significantly detected more of those where identification was possible. So all smaller animals less than 1 kilo were higher detected by the Swift camera, whereas only the Numbat was having higher detection rates by the reposition camera. Medium-sized animals, the differences were not quite as distinct. There were 3 species with higher detection rates from the Swift camera and mixed results from the stationary and the reposition camera. Animals more than 10 kilos, again, the Swift higher detection rates, and only emus were detected better by the reposition camera. The Swift camera is more sensitive than the Reconyx, which also gives it more false triggers. And but we had 7,200 false triggers, which was a manageable amount for 17 cameras being out for 9 weeks in the field. So that did not cause any problems to us. Because we were setting up cameras side by side next to each other, we could determine how many images or how many detections were missed by each camera there. We had from the side-by-side comparison 3,218 known detections. The Reconyx camera missed 1,792, and the Swift camera missed only 17 known detections. And on the graph, we have a little bit of a breakdown of the Reconyx camera detection rates. 46% were detected, and 30% of the detections were missed, and these ones were lying outside the field of view of the camera. So these are the ones which the camera could not detect. Whereas 19 and 23%, these are animals which the camera could have detected, and they were in front of the camera at less than 5 meters and also at more than 5 meters. So we have quite an interesting breakdown here of the missed detections of the Reconyx camera. Looking at overall species accumulation, the Swiss camera had for all species taken together faster species accumulation and higher species accumulation But once we broke it down, we realized that this is actually determined by animals less than 1 kilos. And for animals larger than 1 kilos, the cameras were equally as good, pretty much. But to note here that the Swift camera is never detecting less species than the Reconyx camera. Same for the single species. We can see that the camera performance differs between single species, where cameras equally as good for quenders and brush-tail bottoms. And then we have some differences here. The Swift was detecting western grey kangaroos at a faster rate. The Numbat, all 3 cameras had different outcomes here, with the Swift detecting most at a faster rate, and then the repositioned Reconyx camera followed by the stationary Reconyx camera. And also the western quoll was detected better by the repositioned cameras, and a little bit of this pattern also for the Tama wallaby. So it was quite interesting to look at single species to see the difference between the cameras. Conclusions from chapter 3. The Swift 3.3 wide-angle camera had better detection rates and improved detection probabilities, which I didn't show here because they were very similar to the detection rates. And this was particular for species in the less than 1 kilo than 10 kilo categories. The Swift had higher species accumulation rates, mainly for the less than 1 kilo category, higher site accumulation rates for many species, and missed few detectable animals. And this success is not only due to the wider detection zone, but also to increased sensor sensitivity of the Swift camera. At the same time, during those camera tests, we also conducted sign surveys because we wanted to know the difference between spring and autumn sign surveys. We conducted this at 50 sites. And we also wanted to compare the Swift camera with the sign surveys. Methods were the same as in chapter 2, so I can jump straight away to the key results. The sign surveys conducted in spring. It took us 7 surveys to find numbers at 39 sites. It only took us 5 surveys to find numbered signs at 41 sites. So we can see there that the autumn sign surveys were faster and better. Differences, is it due to numbered density increase? That is unlikely because juvenile disperse in spring, early summer. And is it differences because of the weather? That's quite likely because in the dry weather, it's likely that the scats persist for longer. And another likely reason is observer ability, because with more practice, I was able to find more scats and digs. So the comparison of the Swift camera and the sign surveys at 17 sites, the sign surveys during 3 surveys, we found scats and digs at 16 sites, whereas the camera during 8 weeks found numbers only at 13 sites. So the conclusion from this little chapter is that sign surveys are more effective and more accurate than the camera. And that's why we chose surveys for our chapter 4 field work, where we were looking at habitat use of the Numbat. And there the aims were to find associations between Numbat habitat use and forest type. Here at the right-hand side, you can see the site categories. We had sites in Wondu forest, which some researchers believe to be the preferred forest type for Numbats. And then we had sites in Jarrah forest. And the Jarrah forest had different harvesting histories. The mature Jarrah forest was harvested more than 33 years ago. And then we had sites in areas where timber was harvested using gap creation techniques, where that's an intensive harvesting technique where most of the overstory is removed. And then we had sites in shelterwood areas where about 50% of the overstory trees are removed. We had different time since fire categories, which you can see in the center here. And we also had 2 different categories, feral predator control, standard and intensive. Standard means baits are distributed 4 times a year by aircraft, and intensive areas there is an additional hand baiting conducted 12 times a year. Here I have to note that we can't draw conclusions if the feral predator control is affecting numbered habitat use only if the intensity of the baiting makes a difference. Additionally, we collected other habitat characteristics on ground cover, log hollows, log numbers, soil type, tree basal area, and many more to see which is affecting the habitat use of the numbat. Were conducted at the 78 sites. We did 4 repeat sign surveys. You can see on the map that there were sites all over the study area. And here we used 2 observers because I had a wonderful field assistant who joined me for the entire survey. We designed this field work for single species, single season occupancy modeling. This is the symbol for occupancy. But we estimate the occupancy estimated, we interpreted them here as the probability of habitat use and not as areas occupied, because we did not know, or we still don't know, how long numbered signs persist in the environment. And we also were conducting these surveys in spring again, where we had juvenile numbered dispersal. We used wall tests to determine which habitat covariates were most important, and also AIC-based model selection to determine which of the main covariates of interest were important, like the time since fire, forest type, and introduced predator control. Occupancy modeling has a limitation. You only find out about areas being used or being occupied, and it doesn't give us much information about abundance. Key results from this study: we conducted 312 sign searches. This is Sarah, my wonderful field assistant. We found numbered signs at 65 sites, so 83% of our sites were occupied. And all those sites we found scats, and which made us the proud owners of more than 800 scats in the end of this field work. We had faced some challenges with the occupancy modeling because of the gap creation sites, which were 100% occupied. It appears that occupancy models don't function well with boundary estimates, so we had large errors. Therefore, we had to combine the gap creation and the shelter wood sites. By the way, the shelter wood sites were all occupied except 1. And that helped us then, we could combine these categories into harvested sites. We used, from the wall tests, we identified that only logs were significantly affecting numbered habitat use. You can see on the picture is a harvested site with a lot of logs. And we did not find that any other covariate was affecting occupancy or the detections of numbered signs. We realized that forest type and number of logs were associated with each other. That wasn't surprising that the harvested sites had higher amounts of logs compared to the Jara and the Wondu sites. So we ended up not including the forest type in the AIC-based model selection, but we included the number of logs. And the final model had log number for affecting the numbered habitat use and survey affecting the detection probability. And here you can see the number of logs plotted against the occupancy estimate from the final model, and with more logs present at the site, there was a higher chance for numbats to use that habitat. Surveys, we were finding more numbered signs towards the later surveys. And again, this is probably because weather and observability. Forest type was associated with the number of logs. Therefore, forest type is important for numbered habitat use. With the harvested sites having a higher chance of being used by numbers than the unharvested sites. And we found no evidence that Wondu forest is preferred over Jarrah forest. So conclusions from chapter 4 is that the numbered in the Upper Burren region is habitat generalist, and key habitat requirements are, of course, termites, which we didn't measure, but the animal needs to feed, and the other key habitat requirement is logs, which gives the animal opportunity to hide from predators and for nesting and resting. For the management, we did not find evidence that time since fire introduced predator control intensity or habitat characteristics other than logs relate to numbered habitat use. So during management activities, it's recommended to assure the retention of logs to make the habitat suitable for numbers. Conclusions, also the big question, how many numbers are there in the Upper Burren region? In the conservation advice, the 2018 guesstimate is 200 to 500 adults. The study area was or is 140,000 hectares, just a football stadium here of the size of 1 hectare to give you an idea of the size. So the 140,000 hectares are the marked area here. This was the study area. We had 83% of our sites occupied. If 83% of the Jarrah and Wondu forest occupied here, then we have about 116,000 hectares with numbers. And if numbers have a territory of 100 hectares, we would have a total of 1,162 numbers in the area. And if a number is using a habitat size of 50 hectares, then we would have 2,324 numbers in the area. And also to point out here that we were only looking at areas above the Muir Highway. The area extends down further south with quite large forested areas. So there is most likely even more numbers than these estimates in the Upper Burren region. So final conclusions for this PhD, just on one slide. Upper Burren region has more numbers than previously thought. There's strong evidence that numbers are habitat generalists, and a key habitat requirement is the sufficient number of logs. We did not find any evidence that numbered habitat use is negatively affected by the current forest management activities. And we recommend sign surveys at the moment for long-term numbered monitoring, provided well-trained and enthusiastic observers conduct the surveys, because it is very difficult to find numbered scats and digs. Otherwise, we recommend Swift 3D wide-angle camera traps or similar models installed at 25 centimeters height to detect numbers. For the management, all Jarrah and Wondu forest in the area in the Upper Burren region should be considered as potential numbered habitat and should be treated as such. For future research, numbered sign persistence studies would help us determine how long numbered signs persist in the environment. And if DNA could be extracted from scats, this could help with better abundance estimates. It's also, we recommend to determine if number detections could be increased by using other camera trap models. And if that is the case, further exploration of the downward angle cameras for numbered individual identification would be worth it. Right. Thank you very much. It's a bit weird because I can't see anyone. Let me click back to my other monitor. Is anybody there?
Well done, Anka.
Did I talk to myself? This is so weird because you can't see anyone. You just talk to yourself.
All good, Anka. Well done.
Thank you. Awesome.
If we were in the lecture theatre, Anka, you would be hearing a round of applause, but unfortunately you don't have that today. So, but I'm sure everyone's doing that silently. Thanks, Joe. All right, folks, questions?
Can I ask you a question, Anka?
Of course.
Fascinating findings that, you're talking that there's what 4 to 10 times as many numbats out there as previous estimates suggested.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, like all of this time you've spent thinking about these interesting creatures, like going forward, like as a fire ecologist, I'm particularly interested in the idea that if you have a burn or a bushfire, I would assume that would basically eliminate all numbat sign. Yet, even if the habitat use was uniform, over time I would have expected sign to accumulate without fire, and that fire would sort of wipe that slate clean. Do you buy into that? Do you think that potentially even that suggests that numbats are really getting back into these areas after a burn or a bushfire quite quickly because you found no influence?
Yep. We found numbat signs in very recently burned areas. It could be that some numbats survive in their burrows. And yeah, otherwise they probably fairly quickly move back into the areas. Also, the winter rains, I would assume, would wash away lots of the numbat signs fairly quick. And yeah, when a fire goes through, unless in fires, you usually have some pockets where there are, which were not burned. But we were trying to keep to the areas which were freshly burned to make sure that we find newer signs. Right. So yeah, we were quite surprised that numbats are in freshly burned areas fairly quickly.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up. Also curious, the abundance of logs makes total sense for a species like this, but one can only do so much with one's PhD. But if you were to go out and gather more information, do you think the log size matters? The number of times these stands have been entered over the years, and of course, also the forest type might determine the sort of diameter distribution of the logs available. And are we talking you need more than a 30 centimeter diameter or a 40 centimeter diameter log to be suitable habitat?
We were not looking at diameter size. The logs we measured were all more than 20 centimeters in diameter. However, we also measured log volume, and log volume was not associated with numbat habitat use. So it was purely the number of logs, and we were also surprised that it was actually the number of logs and not the number of suitable log hollows. And I assume this is because numbats can also hide underneath logs from predators. They don't necessarily need the log hollow to hide away from raptors. And also the numbat burrows which we found in the upper warren were always, the entrance was always under logs. So, and therefore we think that generally logs are important and not only the log hollows.
Cool.
Say we. Thank you, Joe.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure, Sarah.
Hi, Anka. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I loved all your images as well. You're clearly a very good photographer. Just in line with what we've just been talking about with the logs, and I'm not sure if this is not an obvious question, but would also termites be associated with number of logs? And clearly termites are important. So where you've got lots of fallen logs, I'm assuming you've probably got more termites. Would that be something that you would have considered?
No, we did not look at the abundance of termites. surely when there is more wooden debris and logs, it probably means that there is more termites. But generally in the Upper Warren, whenever you move a branch or dig a little bit, there is just termites everywhere in the area. So at no point I had a feeling that any of the survey sites that there was a lack of termites.
Oh, okay. So there's lots even in the other ones. It's just less logs. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Might be more in areas with more logs,
Sure.
or probably also the timber harvested sites, but we didn't look at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Can't hear you, Melissa. I only can read your lips.
I was going to say, shall we go to the pub and I'll meet you in town?
You're terrible.
That wasn't a question.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, I got a question. What's the, I guess, what do you see your involvement in the future, or for this, based on the information that you found out, what would be your involvement? How would you apply what you've figured out? And how, with the department, apply it also?
Yes, science service, I would use science surveys for long-term monitoring, probably every 2 or 3 years, I would assume would be enough to do some really intensive surveys. And I also would apply those further down south to see actually the distribution of the species over the whole area.
Anke, may I ask you a quick question and follow up to that?
Sure.
Am I correct in assuming that the prior estimate of 200 to 500 animals was based on driving surveys mostly?
No, there were pure guesstimates. There were some driving surveys conducted in the early 90s, and they were just as successful as the driven surveys which we have done. So all the other estimates are done from opportunistic sightings, which the public and also members of staff of the DBCA record. But it's just a rough guesstimate.
Right. And so going forward, I mean, I think that was one of the really interesting findings, of course, is that it's most cost effective to have actual humans as opposed to just things out there in the forest clicking away. How feasible is it, do you feel, to train observers and then sort of set them loose? Could you yourself train 2 or 3 people in a short period of time and then expect to have data that would be robust to occupancy modeling on a 2 or a 3 or a 4 year rotation?
Yeah, I think that's possible because there are some very enthusiastic staff members at the DBCA and who already joined some of the field work, and with some practice, I'm sure there would be some highly skilled observers. Yeah.
Right on. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, Adrian again.
Hello. It's a tough question, and I'm not.
No.
The challenge is obviously that occupancy tells you something about habitat use. The challenge is how can we improve our sensitivity, do you think, to possibly move either to have a better understanding of how occupancy might relate to abundance, or how do you think we might better address the question of answering how many numbats are actually out there?
That's still difficult, occupancy and abundance, to link this, because when you find scats or digs on one side, you of course don't know how many numbats left those behind. This could be only rectified by actually having some DNA analysis done with the scats, where you then could tell how many individuals are there. Unfortunately, the scats are so small and difficult to find that you can't clear an area prior to a survey, like which is done on some other species where you then have only the very, very fresh scats. I think still other techniques need to be found. I don't think occupancy modeling will bring us closer to absolute abundance. Maybe if the camera traps, there's developments in camera trap technology, which is going forward towards time-lapse cameras, which can be used over a long period of time. And if we could install those and have high enough detection probabilities, then we may be able from pictures to identify individuals. And then you could do capture, recapture analysis. And of course, that would be the holy grail to then find out about the absolute abundance of the Numbat in the Upper Warren. Still a few PhD projects to go.
Yeah, Anke, I was going to say that if you did repeat pretty much what you did for the last few years, if that's possible for any other human being to do, I guess you could use it as a trend, whether they were increasing or decreasing over time eventually.
Yeah, you would at least know the areas which are occupied by Numbats and see if the number of sites increase or decrease where Numbat signs are found.
Mm. Cool, well done.
Any more questions? Otherwise, Kate, I would say, get me out of here.
If there's no more questions, then yes, I think congratulations, Anke, from everyone here. There's a few comments for you to read later in the chat, congratulating you on your great project. So well done, and thanks everyone for coming, and we'll leave it there.
I'm surprised that actually so many of you joined. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm very happy that we can wrap up and that the PhD project was a success. And that's definitely also due to my super duper supervisors who really supported me, gave me great support and great advice during the whole time of my PhD. Thank you a lot.